Pardesi Beats.
Welcome to Pardesi Beats Unplugged. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 4. We've got something a little bit different for you guys today. What we're going to do is a roundtable discussion about who we think is the greatest superhero. So before we jump into that, I am M. Kadwal. With me today, we have Fatwan Singh, Kushwan Singh, and Simran Karal. How you guys doing, boys?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. How are you boys?
Oh, fine, thanks.
Super. I'm doing super.
A lot of sawdust up Simran's butthole right now.
Right, I was very itchy. Just
Yeah.
walked in from the shop. We had a little bit of a late start, and I forgot we were doing a podcast today. So you're gonna see me squirm in my chair quite a bit today, more than
I
usual.
mean, that we'll start right there. That's Simran's superpower. So horn and feather design is his secret superpower. If you don't know
Yeah.
his secret identity, check that
If
out.
you need
on,
me to make you a
socials.
coffee table, hit me up.
That's your man.
All right. So let's jump into it. Superhero. It's something that, I mean, as kids we grew up watching cartoons. We grew up reading comic books, seeing these things, and we would fantasize about, oh, that'd be so sick if I could fly, or if I could have this superpower, or if I could do this, or like. But now, if you look at the world of superheroes, if you just even look at the world of Marvel and DC, keeping aside all the other, like the independent superheroes, the worlds are so big, the universes are so big, there's so many characters, there's so many storylines. But I guess it really boils down to, what would you define a superhero as?
I don't know. That's a weird question. Like, I mean, you try to think of it as like, okay, like, are they like a super powered being of some kind, right? Or you look at different examples of individuals throughout time who chose to either fight crime or battle villains or whatever without superpowers. So I don't know if superpowers justifies it. I think maybe it's like the means or the ability to do superhuman things, and I don't even know if that qualifies under that description. So there's this idea, there's like everyday superheroes, the kind of people that just do what they do and do it for other people. Where you could bring in like doctors and nurses and firefighters and stuff like that. But that's kind of boring. So I think we got to narrow it down to
The fantasy world.
Yeah,
I think since we're adults, like the thought process you just shared, Simran, is like what we think about now. But like as kids, it's like okay, we have like our traditional cartoon or graphic novel characters, right? Because that was like extraordinary to us. That was super, and it was like super, as you said, superhuman, right? That's not stuff that we could do. So for us, like when growing up, like any child really who like has access to like a TV or whatever, like they think like, oh, that's a superhero, somebody who can like has these powers, are so strong, can save people, right? Things like that. And I think that's what we're gonna focus on a little bit today.
So
yeah, like pop culture superheroes,
Yeah. So
I mean, we could do the whole nostalgic like Hallmark moment thing and say, it's my dad. But we're gonna go into like
I said, boring. No one cares.
Yeah.
I think okay, so we could so I think we would have to narrow it down to fictitious basically
character. Like a fictitious
characters.
I like that. I like
written,
that.
I agree.
Written in comics or graphic novels. Would you guys extend this to anime?
No.
I would do anime like in its own.
Well,
yeah, that's a
in its own
whole.
care- yeah,
it
its
depends,
own
right?
thing.
Like, how anime do you want to get? Mainstream anime or like real anime where you're like, I don't like. I wouldn't know half.
But I think that's the same thing with superheroes. Like if we think of when we think of superheroes, we think Marvel, DC. But there is
Yeah.
so many more. There's
So like what I'm saying is like
other worlds.
Super Saiyan Goku, you can't put in
I-
there as a
I feel like that anime is a whole
I don't think
nother-
that would qualify
whole
for
nother
this.
world.
For this because, well, it's not a bad thing, but I mean, like, I think that's like a.
Why don't we
when
just
talk about
simply say
anime, it's a
comic
whole nother
book?
topic altogether.
Comic book superheroes that were once
Yeah.
published in a
Right.
comic book, because
Sure.
Well,
that's
like
a lot
but
more.
I assume like there's anime comics as well.
yeah,
There-
they're,
there
they're
definitely
called
is.
mangas. They're called
anime
manga.
comic. They're
There
called
you go.
mangas.
Yeah, don't get on.
Yeah,
Christopher's
don't
nerves.
upset
Yeah,
the
that's Kushi's expertise. So,
manga.
Yes,
But no, like
Um,
there's some really cool like boundary
sure.
pushing stuff that people have been doing for years in manga that hasn't even touched, like North American graphic.
Well, yeah,
like
the
graphic
mainstream,
novels.
the mainstream, right?
Well, we say mainstream here, but like realistically,
It's
like
definitely
manga
not.
has enduring popularity amongst kids and adults in
manga
the
is
Asian market.
huge.
It's
yeah.
arguably much bigger than like Western comics.
I'd say it's bigger than graphic novels for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like it's wild.
Yeah.
And like based on the population and readership and the kind of fandom it's generated, it's crazy. So yeah, I think that deserves its own discussion.
Yeah, that's why
you guys just want to get into it then and just like let's just see and we'll see
I'm
if
gonna jump. Yeah, I'm gonna jump
we'll
in
debate
on that.
whether or not
like,
your picks are qualified or not.
And for me, like a superhero, like you said, is somebody that had that superpower, the extraordinary power that made them superhuman or supernatural. When we think of that, it's like I wouldn't be able to fly. I wouldn't be invincible. Like I want to have those abilities as a child or as a teenager, right? So for me, a superhero has to have some sort of thing that makes him or her extraordinary or a supernatural being of sorts. So that for me, that's the definition of a superhero.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
Right.
I mean,
that's how I kind of justify the picks that I
yeah
makes sense.
I get that.
I won't agree with the typical villain versus good guy thing. I think those like lines are subjective. But like yeah, I think in the traditional sense of what the one said is just like comic based characters that were created, from graphic novels like by Stan Lee or whoever, right? So that's where my head's going to be with it.
I think you also have to address the fact that we have to discuss the superhero instead of the comic.
Yeah.
Because
because the comics is the stories that make it up, right? Anyways, so
there are wild superheroes that have probably been a part of like teams in like comics or whatever, or like just have had like poorly written comics, but the concept of the hero is
the character in itself is pretty
is really wild. It's just like the actual execution of it might not have been great or whatever, or would have had a bad run. Or,
well, that's like a good point because of there's so many different authors of comics nowadays too, right? Like so we've moved away from original authors, right?
Yeah.
So like you can look at like this version 52 of like Superman or DC versus like old school Jeff Loeb or something. So like the stories are different, the art is different as well. And like so when you're saying that is important because the way that like superhero is portrayed, it changes through generations. It has changed through generations.
And the individuals telling the stories.
There's different iterations of the same character. Like if you think of even, and when you talked about that, the one that came to my mind was the Flash. Like not necessarily the greatest superhero, but the different renditions. Like you have Barry
Allen.
West, you have Barry Allen, the Wally West, right? Like you have the different versions, and they all have positives, but not necessarily like it's hard to kind of encompass certain types of superheroes as one whole identity. And I think that's kind of what you were touching on, Simran. Like there's parts, bits and pieces that are really good, and then there's bits and pieces that are really, really bad.
Yeah, people like, I mean, how many times has Spider-Man been written in like in the different universes and things like that, and like and you're gonna look at all those things and you're gonna see, okay, which Spider-Man do I like, or like and you're just like, okay,
yeah,
Yeah, and you're just like, what version of this character, or what version of this set of powers, or whatever,
Yeah,
or like
it's
origin
kind of hard.
stories, or whatever is
It's
like
kind of
an
hard to talk about
actual.
it in like generalized version, but like
You have
that's
to.
kind
So
of
here, like when we choose our superhero, we have to get into the specifics of why we chose the one that we did
Yeah.
because of all these parameters that we're sort of discussing at the moment, right? And these variables and parameters will be very different for everybody. Like
very subjective.
the things with comic books is like, so I mean, I have maybe a decade on reading them over maybe the current company here in some aspects, but at the same time, I there's a little theory I have. Like if you're a reader of comic books, you're gonna actually, if you really get into them, you're gonna actually go back in time a little bit and pick up ones that are a little bit older. You're gonna find histories of a character. But the thing is, like,
you don't just rock a character.
You can just pick
like,
up what's out there on the newsstand.
Yeah, let me just pick up like issue 735 of
Exactly.
Spider-Man.
And I have a story like so. Me and Simran, when we were in university together, every week without fail, Simran would be like, "Yo, let's go to the comic book store."
Yeah,
I was a very
casual.
I was a very casual comic book guy.
New comic book day.
Yeah, right by Remedy. So I was a very casual comic book guy. I'm like, yeah, I Flash is great. Yo, he runs really fast. Yo, that's sick. And someone's like, yo, like, do you know his origin story? Do you know the different worlds, the golden era, the different eras of him? I'm like, what are you?
And I didn't,
about?
and that wasn't meant to like.
No, but
like,
you're like, there's
shit
so
on
much
your
more.
experiences.
There's so much more to it.
Yeah, I'm like, you're gonna have your hair blown
surface.
back. Like, yo, like, check this out. Like, it's like,
and then
there's a lot more you can do.
That's when I dove deeper into it. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
okay, there's more than one version of the Flash. There's
and you picked up that like giant like omnibus history of and that's when I think I made you like a comic book nerd.
Yeah,
like
and that's the beauty of it, right? Like we can all
so
have
that's
our
Malik's
favorites.
comic book origin story, boys and girls.
Yeah, that's my.
I like have a similar approach. I've never been an issue guy. Like I didn't read when I was young. I read when my high school years and then kept kind of going. But I was never like issue 5, issue 3, because like I hate the short read. I'm definitely like a binger mentality, which is I want the story now. I'm ready to dive in for the full, next like
full
whatever.
Chapter to chapter.
Yeah. And so I've always done like ultimates or like the absolute versions or the essentials, whatever, right? So that's my style too.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I had I think my first introduction into comic books was it was this little like black and white packet, like mini version of Ultimate Spider-Man, and it was like a collection. So it was like it was a graphic novel like collection, like volume 3. And so that basically was very, very early in that run. And I got really into the Ultimate Universe from like, I think I was like 12 when it first started up, like 11, 12 years old. And it was like a phenomenon.
15 now, right? So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it carried from there. And I think I hit pause on it for a while, and I haven't really got back into it since that time, mostly just because I haven't had the time
but now also like we look at the world of comic books. Like if you look at the Marvel universe, there's like movies and TVs. Huge. Like there's so much of an impact and so far reaching now from where it came from.
Yeah, and there was a time where like Marvel was struggling. Yeah. Like they like I think it filed for bankruptcy. They had to sell off a bunch of their assets to different companies, and that's
even when you think about it, like when
in
we
the
were
90s
growing up,
well.
we're like,
90s too.
I read comic books. You're like, oh, you read comic books? Like,
yeah. What are those?
Yeah.
Yeah. And now when I told my parents I wanted a comic book, they didn't even know what the hell I was talking about. They're like Archie comics, like the toilet te padde hunde hai.
I read those too.
I mean, those are so great.
Till this day, Archie's Weird Mysteries is like one of my favorite shows. It was one of the like best put together shows
back on YTV days.
Yeah.
So okay, look, I like kind of the direction, guys.
Let's jump into
it. Well, before we jump into it, Simran, Malik, we kind of figured out how you got into comics. Kushi, how did you get into them again? And then like maybe we should all tell how we got into them, and then sort of go from there since we're kind of already doing that.
Well, if we're specifically talking about comics, it's like you always had comics at home. You are my elder brother, sibling. So there was always like a
Ew.
bunch of stuff. Yeah, you. There was always a bunch of stuff at home that kind of like pointed me in those directions, and I'd say TV shows are our first introductions into that realm. But comics, like I would say, like it was, you know, like the Sunday or Saturday Sunday comics, like those were the first
In
like
the
kind of things.
newspapers.
Yeah, that's like the first stuff I delved into in terms of like a comic. And then graphic novels, like I was kind of saying, around high schools when I, well, weirdly enough, Simran, it's the same comic as well, Ultimate Spider-Man, the whole
Yeah,
series, because they were in
loved
the
it.
library at that time, so I used to check them out.
Yes.
And so yeah, I used to check them out issue by issue, all those volumes. I think there in total there was like just under 20 or something of that.
Yeah, 2022, and then like it went
Yeah.
on, and then there was like a there was a lot of dumb stuff that happened. They
Yeah,
had to
so like I stopped
retcon
it
a bunch
like
of things.
in between like 10 to 20 or whatever, because like
Yeah.
that's whatever my library had. So either way, like that was kind of where I started reading, and then I started just purchasing like the bigger absolute volumes of like, so a lot of Superman stuff. Uh, and then more recent days, like I've been buying a lot. I still buy, like even like on sales Boxing Day, because there's really good sales on some stuff.
Ooh.
Like on Chapters online or whatever. But like I haven't been able to read as much as I used to. University, I read a good amount. Like on anytime I took a flight, I would take it on the airplane, things like that.
Yeah.
Bus rides were really easy to read.
Same.
It's just I just in general don't read as much now, but I've read a lot. So it kind of started in high school, the reading aspect of it. So yeah. And like I mean, the stories in like a comic book are just so well done versus, you know, you don't always get the best in a movie or something, or even TV shows.
It's really immersive, and you really get a scale for action, whereas in plain text it's really difficult to, and like to describe action, especially such expansive and
Yeah.
wildly powerful action, in a very accurate way.
You have like your imagination, but then when the imagery is
Yeah.
there to provide it for you, then you're like, oh
It's-
wow.
Yeah,
especially
it's a
for
very
like some of like the more meaningful, like even not even action. If there's like a storyline that talks about something very serious, you see
Yeah.
that character in peril. You see that character, his body movements. Like your imagination can take you so far, reading can take you so far, but that
There's-
additional art
yeah.
with it, it really, the lighting of the art, the coloring, the shading, and all that stuff, it really adds a lot to it.
Yeah, to capture a singular emotion without text behind it is really interesting. And it's where like a lot of like very iconic artists have been able to really accurately capture like immense emotion just in a, like, you know, you'll have the 2-page spread of something, or even like a single frame, and have it be
Very powerful. Very
yeah,
meaningful.
have it be really
And that's it.
powerful. And it's
Like, look at this. Like, I'm
that's-
just showing you Daredevil. Like, it's actually a Wolverine comic, but look at his face. You're kind of like, you can see a lot more than
You've never gone that
used
from
to.
like a TV show or a movie.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, unless something's been hyper like blunted to make it seem more like in a comic style, right? So I think of like Sin City or Watchmen, or even like 300.
Yeah.
which
Sorry, I
started
meant
out as
I
graphic
literally
novels.
meant Daredevil. But yeah, there have been movies that have portrayed
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah,
well.
that sort of style, and they've tried to emulate
Yeah,
that
yeah.
style.
Like
but
Watchmen, I
yeah,
thought was incredible.
Sin City.
yeah, visually,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
At the,
Frank Miller.
there's certain aspects of that, but
Yeah,
like,
and-
like, sorry, you were gonna go. No,
Well,
I was just gonna say that.
I was
Like,
gonna pick on Pat because he's kind of the godfather of the comic book world in our roundtable discussion, as he pulled up his iPad, and there's like the traditional method of flipping through the books, but I
Yeah.
think Pat's kind of stuck with any possible form of comic book.
You don't even know
Comic book
like
world.
what you cannot see in the frame right now. There's two
Yeah.
towers here.
All
They're full of
Funko
comic
Pops.
books. Like I can pull some out right now just without knocking anything else down. Like here's one right now. Like I have there's too many. And you know, well, I'll tell you just quickly how I got into comics was it's funny because I can't even remember how I got into them. But my earliest recollections are there was shout out to the Duggan neighborhood in by Southgate Mall. There, we used to live there when I was a kid, and there's a Max convenience store. So shout out to the Duggan Max. And yeah, so when I was a kid, I don't know how I ended up with them, but I used to have Ninja Turtle comic books that was published by Archie Comics. So Archie Comics used to publish some of the original, not the very original, but some of the original early day Ninja Turtle comic books. And essentially speaking, all I remember is just having the comics, and then either my dad or my uncle, my tayadi, who, you know, was closer than that to us, but he used to take me there, and I used to get these comic books all the time. I don't remember a starting point because I've always been surrounded by them. And then ironically, coinciding with the comic books, I'm sure that these little guys had something to do with it.
Oh yeah, action figures, 100%.
Being on television. And did you know that the Ninja Turtles were actually started as action figures, and then to sell the action figures, they created the TV show?
I think that was a pretty common thing back in the 80s, right?
But
where
the
like
original thing
toy sales was where they,
Yeah.
well, like toy sales was like the big push for like children's television.
But in this situation, just to kind of get not
They
to
were
get off
murderers,
topic,
weren't they?
is they made the Ninja Turtle toys,
Yeah.
but they made the TV show to sell the toys. They didn't actually do
that's
it the
what I
other
mean.
way around.
And there's actually the reason why for that is that they actually couldn't. There was advertising regulations against directly advertising towards children for toys.
Exactly.
And so they made this law, or they to get around it, they basically made like 20-minute animated advertisements essentially to sell their toys. And like if you watch like old like Transformers or like He-Man or Ninja Turtles, they always had some new weapon or something like that to like in every new episode to like all right, so Malik, you want
to pick up the toys too?
Yeah, so let's kind of jump into it now, because we can go on and talk about the origins and our origin stories, but as Pat shows some very, very nice Ninja Turtle comics. But let's jump right into it. And I am going to start off the discussion of who I think the greatest superhero of all time is. And what I want is like an open discussion. It's like I'll make some points, you guys make some counterpoints, and then we can
we'll roast you, don't worry.
That's fine. I think the one that I picked is pretty common for most people. And I think the greatest of all time superhero is Spider-Man.
Okay.
And one of the biggest reasons I think for me that I picked Spider-Man is because he's so relatable. He's kind of that everyman origin story, where it's like, oh, I'm a teenager. I'm obviously talking about the Peter Parker version.
Yeah.
I'm a teenager. I'm having problems. Yeah, and I get bitten by a spider. And when you think and when we're growing up, when we think of how am I going to become a superhero, we think something odd like that's going to happen. So I get bitten by a spider, I become Spider-Man. I get bit by a mosquito, I become Mosquito Man. But that's not the point.
Butcher Man.
What about Ant-Man?
Yeah. So I think with Spider-Man, it's not only the ability to be relatable in that time. He has like his emotional connectivity. When you think of his storyline with his uncle passing, who was his mentor,
Uncle Ben.
Yeah, that storyline in itself is something that has been a huge part of his character, and it really showed that human side to him of dealing with grief. When we think of other superheroes, which I'm sure will come up, that grief aspect isn't touched on at all, or if it is, it's kind of romanticized. Whereas with Uncle Ben, you see Spider-Man take the blame for, if I did this, Uncle Ben this wouldn't have happened.
And that's where a really big a phrase comes from. And I'll let you say it because you picked them. But
you're the godfather of comic books here, so I'll let you go.
I don't know if I'm the godfather of comic books, but I mean,
in our roundtable.
Somebody say it, because
I'm definitely the old man in the room. But with great power comes great responsibility.
And
And yeah, go for it. Like, I mean, Uncle Ben said that to Peter Parker at a young age before Uncle Ben passes away, which sets the whole standard for that original Spider-Man. It's shout out. I gotta say this. I gotta jump in. Shout out to what Marvel did with Miles Morales Spider-Man,
and
the
that's the
Black
thing. Like,
Spider-Man, and I
yeah,
love it.
It's huge, and that's another big piece, right? Like, we talk about the ability for us to relate to the superhero, but I think with Spider-Man, when we see with the multiverse, there's so much other things that they're touching on. So it's not only educational, inspirational, but like the longevity, it's huge. When
Yeah,
you
for
think
me,
of, go ahead.
yeah, like no, like that, like because I grew up like that's what got me into that into comic books was Ultimate Spider-Man, and watching that character develop from like the moment he got his powers, like, and because I was like the same age at that time as this stuff was happening, so it
When you
felt
got your
very like,
powers,
He was an angsty
yeah.
teen.
So yeah, it was interesting reading that and like evolving with this character, and then having that, because basically the whole point of that universe was like a fresh start, so they could do whatever they wanted with those stories.
based off
And
the movies, though, related to the movies, right?
no, not entirely. Not it didn't, it wasn't entirely involved with the movies, but like essentially it was just like a refresh of a universe with the same kind of characters, but they could go in any direction they wanted to. So they were familiar,
Gotcha.
but they weren't like exactly as they'd happened back in the 60s. They had like modern issues to deal with, and it was a very very it was a very progressive uh like title at the time, or like imprint, we'll say. And what ended up happening with that was that they killed, spoilers, they killed Peter Parker in that universe. And I was devastated. I was angry.
I still remember
I'm
that.
I'm still
I still
angry a little bit. I mean,
I remember
was,
that vividly. Simon was
yeah,
very salty for many weeks
but
after that.
and then I think given the time and uh given a lot of thought on this, to see the direction in which the conversations they had in that series went, especially earlier on with Brian Michael Bendis and Bagley drawing things out. They went in such a cool direction with the art style and the writing that it actually seemed like the most natural thing for them to go to this character that was a minority, a visible minority, and to address those issues in different ways. And they did it so honorably, with the crossovers and the tie-ins and things like that. And it later led to like a motion picture. It was really interesting to see how they honored that character so well, and to bring it bring it into a modern light in such a progressive way, because and it's so ahead of its time. Like that was in like I want to say 2010 2011 that they brought this kind of a mainstream black character in, which is wild. And then you see how that kind of a character, how important that is now.
Yeah. So
Right.
Malik, what else? Like, go on with your like. So you were starting with the Uncle Ben thing, and then.
Yeah, sorry, I derailed that.
No, but and that's a huge thing,
Big
right?
ups.
So I think that one of the biggest thing about Spider-Man is that it really it humanizes superheroes to an extent. And I think that's something that we don't see a lot in different universes and different superheroes.
And most superheroes are grown men, and Spider-Man was a teenager, right?
Yeah, he built. And the cool thing about the whole Spider-Man thing is not only did he grow, but that humor that he had, that wittiness, that was in the comic books, but it also kind of transcended into the movie world as well. So you had that childish, but he also had that witty banter, which I think for me as a person, I'm very punny and very terrible with those puns, but
Yep.
that's something that I really enjoyed. I'm like, this guy's cool. I'm enjoying these. The other big thing I think with the humanizing aspect is he was always the underdog. Um, when we think
Well,
of
the seeming underdog, right? He was
for
drawn that
for the
way.
most part, yeah.
Yeah.
But but when you think of other characters, I'm intentionally not saying names because I don't want to put any down, but they're always muscular. They're always some are gods, some are experiments that have gone wrong, and they're superpowers. Whereas Spider-Man had to learn everything on his own. He had no special training.
He had no mentor for a while.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think that the human aspect of that is huge. And what, like Simran touched on, what it has become, not only with the multiverse, but if you look at video games as well. There's been a bunch of Batman games. There's been a bunch of other video games, but Spider-Man was like one of the main selling points for the PS5.
Yeah. I think
Right?
in
And
every
it's still it's still
in every major
huge.
context, this guy is like wildly
Spider-Man-
popular.
There was some
You know-
great Spider-Man games on PS2.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like it's still relevant, right?
Yeah.
And I think the recognizability is a huge thing that we should also think of. Like, I could bring up like Bionic Bunny. I think Bionic Bunny is the greatest superhero. And if you know who Bionic Bunny is, I'll leave it at that. But it
That's
doesn't
dope.
have that recognizability.
But do you know
right?
who Bucky O'Hare is?
Right, exactly, right. So there's like everybody knows like the larger characters, but those smaller characters do play a huge role. But you can't necessarily say they're the greatest. And
You know, the thing that you know, we kind of with the universes. So here's the thing: there's different universes in terms of the publishers of comics. Like on Kushwan's screen, you see Marvel Comics, so they refer to as the Marvel universe and DC, and then there's things where the universes clash, and I'll get into that later. But essentially, Spider-Man was not the only, but if you had to just pick one, he as a character was the one that took Marvel to the next level.
To the point where Sony was like, we're not selling them back to you.
Not even Sony. Forget Sony.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the 60s still, right? Like Stan Lee wrote. You think Spider-Man was his first? No, he did Fantastic Four. He did Journey into Mystery. He did all these other things. Journey into Mystery became Thor, right? So the thing is, like, he did all these other different comics, and they were all doing okay. But as soon as he launched Spider-Man, the whole Marvel universe took off. Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and then later, not so far later, but Captain America, X-Men, all these things started coming out. But Spider-Man is sort of arguably like, if you had to pick, in my opinion, if you had to pick one Marvel character to represent Marvel, it would be Spider-Man, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great pick. Like, just
the character itself is like, he's a super smart guy. He's got crazy powers.
He can talk his way out of anything.
But he's relies on his like scientific acumen and like super nerd, not very popular, not very smooth with the ladies, but he puts this mask on. He's allowed to be this alter ego where, you know, he can go beat up bad guys and stuff like that. But at the same time, that great power, great responsibility thing, there's always little inroads in a lot of the more famous stories told about him, about his restraint, because you see what he was able to do in so many cases, and like his power limit. I mean, those things fluctuate depending on the artist or the writer, but like you see the things this character is able to do, and yet when
as
he
Peter
approaches,
Parker, he has to.
No, not even as Peter Parker, as a superhero.
Yeah.
As Spider-Man, when he punches Doc Ock, he could literally.
He doesn't kill him. Yeah. He
doesn't kill the guy. Like, you know, when he goes up against, you know, and this, you know, this happened. He, you know, gets his body possessed and all this and that, and Dr. Octopus is in Peter Parker's body and goes up against against the Scorpion and blows the guy's jaw clean off with one punch. And Dr. Octopus has this realization, like, Otto Octavius is just like, holy crap, this guy has been holding this back the entire time.
Yeah, and then so for context, for anybody who doesn't know what he's talking about, Dr. Octavius's sort of soul or whatever, or brain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, don't ruin it for people, but like still.
No, but that's obvious. It goes inside of Spider-Man's body.
Yeah, it's happened in multiple.
Well, I'm sure Marvel will make a TV series about it. Don't worry.
No, it's so cool. It's so cool. You got to read the comic on it.
Yeah, it's not my favorite story arc. I think,
but you also learn a lot about Otto Octavius.
Yeah, you do.
And you're like, whoa, this guy's actually relatable. And even though he's an older professor type of guy, you're just like, what the heck? Anyway, let's leave it there. Let's leave it.
Yeah. Not my favorite series for him, but yeah.
That's my kind of putting forth of who I think could be argued as one of the greatest superheroes of all time.
Aces.
That was definitely my favorite. And like, I'm just gonna echo some things, I guess, that you said. I think like for me, it was like it's the relatability, like, but the one you said, like, if you choose like a face of Marvel, it could be him. And to me, it's because, like, okay, you look at Captain America, you look at Thor, any of those origin guys, like Fantastic Four, they had some cool stuff, but like those things were kind of weird. Like, hey, with Peter Parker's origin story, it was also spawned like a random luck. It's not like he was born with powers and things like that as well, right? So circumstance happened, like, where just something random, like 0.00 whatever percent happened to him. He's just a normal kid who's just living his daily life. Another relatable thing. He's trying to live life and kind of like take care of his family. Another thing. He loves his family, different things. There's different challenges at home he has to deal with, right? So things we know in our daily life, friends getting bullied, things like that. So all these different things for us where it's just like, this is our life too, whatever, and maybe not the same thing. So the relatability is so strong. But then that super witty cleverness of him, that's like, for me, took the cake, because that humor aspect is so good, especially
his personality, right?
Yeah, it's just like, you don't want some boring banda, right, or some boring guy or whatever, right? This guy has so much personality, especially when he's fighting like the villains.
Yeah, like the fate of the world is at stake. This guy's getting knocked around, and he's still just throwing these one-liners.
Yeah, and that to me was like, that was what made him like my favorite, because he's just so funny in these situations. And then he still has like the ultimate confidence, and he gathers up the belief in himself. He doesn't have it, he gathers it, and over time. Things like that. So, and then like a lot of his story is kind of like self-made in the sense, because he has to learn the ropes himself
and it takes you along for the journey with him. And that's the coolest thing with Spider-Man, is like, as he's learning, you're learning things too. And and as a kid, imagine you're a kid learning these things. I learned a lot about the world and responsibility through comic books.
Yeah, well,
like what's right and what's wrong, sort of.
Yeah. And then there's also like the aspects of tragedy and stuff in the
and how to
he
deal
actually
with
faces
things.
real challenges, not just outside of like his origin story is just like these like repeat, like there's failure, which people don't like. I know a lot of comic books don't always
it always shows the good sides, right? Yeah, it always shows the positives,
they always show like, hey, how are we gonna defeat this hero? Oh, like, your hero always triumphs. So sometimes he doesn't.
There's always like in the both comic book universes, the main ones, DC and Marvel. There's not just two, by the way. There's always been, and I'll pick on Marvel because I usually read Marvel, but it's not only Marvel. I'll pick on their goody superhero, which is Captain America. And when you watch Captain America, or even watch the movies, in the movies they give him a little bit more of a personality, but in the comic books he was just that I'm the good guy. Edge.
Yeah,
this is right.
Very black. And
this is wrong. Yeah. We do not kill, but we do not allow evildoers to get away. Yeah. And the Red Skull is a metaphor for Hitler and Nazis, and let's destroy them.
Yeah, but and not really a metaphor. He was a direct Nazi. Like, he was a Nazi.
I can get into what Red Skull was, but let's just say that for simplicity. Yeah. But so then Spider-Man comes along, and exactly what you just said.
Unconventional, but conventional at the same time. And I think it like Cushy put it, it was relatable, but also supernatural at the same time. So
And
I
at the
think
same
that,
time, like how many people are like, oh, you know, like if you hear like, oh, there's a character named Lion Man, you're like, oh, lions are cool, they're strong. Who thinks spiders, right? Like,
spiders, yeah.
oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna relate to a spider. Like,
Whoever
oh,
knew
yours
like a web slinging power could be so cool.
yeah, like
Creative.
spider.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, it's a lot of credit to Stan Lee to have
Oh,
designed
100,000
like
all of it.
storytelling,
all these
right? It's all the
characters, yeah, and the
storytelling.
storytelling, yeah. I
It's
mean, they're
phenomenal.
like you can give the guy crap for like having a bit of a cookie cutter shtick at the end of it, but realistically,
but it worked. But it worked for him, right?
yeah, he had so much.
So we're all in agreement. Spider-Man's the best. Should we end the podcast? Here?
I agree for sure. I agree
whoa.
for sure. But I do have another pick now that you said that, and I think okay, maybe I'll go into it.
You know what? I mean, if we ended it right here, I would be okay with it. I'm not gonna lie.
No,
And
we
you
have
know
to talk.
that's-
There's a lot more people to talk about, and we'll
No, but at
highlight
the s-
them.
Yeah, but no,
Yeah.
Spider-Man is I think it's an
Very solid.
overall solid pick.
I
Yeah,
agree.
solid pick.
I agree. Like I will second Malik's thing because I was gonna say it anyways, but either way, I have a second pick, and now this one might be.
Are we
little
going into you next?
Yeah, we're going
Yeah.
into me. I think we
Okay.
talked about Spider-Man, covered him a lot, but this one might be a little controversial. This goes into the X-Men. One particular character from the X-Men, and it is not any one of Xavier's people. It is Magneto himself. I
Oh,
think
wow.
Magneto is the best superhero,
Wow.
not villain. Of all
Okay, you know
time.
what? You stole. Okay, all right.
What?
Continue,
Wait,
continue.
you gonna say that too?
I was actually continue.
Well, I got it first, I guess. And the reason why I chose Magneto is because you have your conventional good and bad. Like Magneto, in a conventional sense, was generally pretty much always put into the bad light. But when you start delving into the reasons why he did what he did, he acted the way he did, it's nothing is wrong in my opinion. Like he was just doing what he thought right by his people, right? Mutants. So when you look at it, Magneto is a mutant amongst other people, kind of in, I don't know the time frame whenever they first get discovered, but the one that you might know the time frame.
In the
like
real
60s,
comic book timeline, it was
70s,
in the 40s.
40,
No, it was in the
right,
30s.
right.
No, sorry.
Right after the
Magneto
war, wasn't it?
was in the 30s. Yeah, before
Or during the
World
war.
War II.
Yeah. And so either way, that time mutants are kind of getting discovered and they're like, what is this? And there's a very heavy underlining tone of us versus them throughout the whole series, where Magneto was kind of representing them, the opposition in a sense. And generally, Magneto has never really did anything negative or attacking before he was provoked. And so his idea was, we're getting ousted. People are looking at us. They're what's the word when you're focusing on somebody? Oppressing like mutants. And so what?
Stereotypes,
Yes,
scapegoated.
exactly.
And-
so what his idea was? Yeah, go ahead.
And I think that's a huge piece that we kind of touched on with Spider-Man too. The underlying actual story of Magneto is he could be compared to like a civil rights activist. He
Yeah.
was defending
Exactly.
he was
He
defending
was in the
those
war.
mutants.
Like
Yeah.
he was taken by Nazis, and
Yeah.
because he was a Polish, if
And
I'm
you
not
think
mistaken.
about, and you think about the time that it came out, that was a very, very
Cold War era it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
And then the
pivotal
comic-
times of us versus them, and then he's also sorry, Simran, like he's also like then going on to be like, okay, I'm gonna do something about this. And if you talk about like a civil rights movement person or an activist,
Yeah,
like, different
I was just
people,
gonna touch on
he
the same thing.
gathers them together. He creates
Yeah.
a group of mutants, and to him, he's doing what he has to do for his people's survival.
Yep.
Can I
In
can
order
I
to
make a
get them another
correlation?
seat at the table as well, because they're treated like they're so feared. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say if you go into civil rights and just going into our American cousins to the south, let's just say, in the Black civil rights movement, there was two leaders. One is Malcolm X, and one is Martin Luther King. Right, very prominently, everybody knows who they are. But I'll tell you something about the two. Their methods weren't the same. They did not see eye to eye in their methods, but their main general purpose and I guess you could say movement was for the same reason.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like Magneto, and I
Yeah.
guess
Xavier,
you can say
right?
Xavier, right?
Yeah, I don't know if the writers of the comic books saw to make those guys, parallels in real life in that case. But what I will say is that the writers of the comic books, and I see this more and more in Marvel, they routinely have been throughout their history quite socially observant with the way they've written their comic books, but as well as the way their characters' publication history has expanded into other genres. So when we talk about the X-Men in um, film and television, I think less so in film, but definitely more so in television. You look at the comic series as much lauded back in the 90s. I think we of a certain generation will remember the opening credits to that show.
Oh, yeah.
It was very iconic for the subject matter it was trying to portray, and for the age group it was trying to portray it for. You saw, this was like Saturday morning cartoons for kids like 10 and younger, and they're talking about issues synonymous with like race relations and like equal rights and labor laws and like just things like that, and government overreach and things like that. And it's just like really interesting to see that it is more than just like teenage angst problems. They're
Yeah.
really approaching like these serious issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more than just I'm gonna go beat up the bad guys. That's the story.
Yeah,
of
it's
the
like,
guy's
hey,
time.
like, and then when you humanize the bad guy,
Yeah.
and you realize that, hey, this bad guy isn't such a bad guy, right?
Yep.
And like all these individuals have so many more layers and context. You realize that it's a much closer facsimile for real life.
When
And I
you
think that's what I'm always striving for, is like trying to see comic books in a light where it's like it's closer to how you live, like, because and I was gonna make this point with when we were talking about art styles and stuff. Sometimes the farther you get from reality in an art style, the more powerful the imagery becomes, the more powerfully iconic the imagery becomes, and you can actually dilute the message within art when you overly observe accuracy. If we got into, if like comic books started talking about the intricacies of I don't know, laws regarding like if they started talking about Jim Crow laws, for example, in the Deep South, people would just blank out. But if you
Yeah.
gave that metaphoric symbolism, and you
in a different perspective,
and you diluted it a bit to where only the strong points punch through, you understand that the point you're trying to make is what sends the message. And I think it's really important and that's routinely been what the comic art form, the comic style has been for, whether it's been political commentary in news media, or it's been in these cases for the consumption of kids, teens, young adults. It's always been and it's been a very how do I say it, like a rebellious form of media. It's been in significant opposition to whatever. It's always spoken truth to power. And I
and
think,
if you really like, just going back to Magneto and the point that Simran's also making, if you really want to see Magneto in that hero light, you need to look into, or at least you can even find a synopsis of the Age of Apocalypse X-Men.
Yeah.
I think sequentially, based on the comic book timeline, I think that was the first, not the first instance, but the first
Yeah.
series that
Yeah.
showed Magneto as a hero and leader of the mutants.
Well,
And
yeah, and you always see like through and through. There's always been cases of him
showing glimpses of that.
Behaving nobly, but
He's very nobly is the
yeah.
right word, because when there's moments where like the X-Men are attacked, even people are attacked, not necessarily people with Magneto, but when the X-Men and mutants are attacked, and even if it's like versus the X-Men, Magneto will help them, opposed to not help them.
Yeah.
When it's people, regular people against mutants, it is. But then there's the other side of it where it's like he also kind of like he has villainous tendencies. But you know what? Kushwant, you picked Magneto. I was going to pick Magneto for the same, because it's a very unconventional.
Just add on to whatever.
Anyways. Well, I'm not going to add on because I have another pick now. But at the same time, Magneto he has a lot of these heroes have a cause, right? But Magneto is not one that's often picked. But you can argue in one aspect of looking at it, the reason Professor X, who technically is the most powerful mutant, the reason he fears Magneto more than anybody else is because Magneto can destroy the world single-handedly. But because Magneto is so powerful and emotionally driven, Professor X thinks he's the biggest threat, which as a hero is very powerful. So Magneto is, a great pick.
In one of the universes, he did pretty much do that.
Yeah. So anyways, so that like caps my pick, because I thought he was just such a I mean, I didn't even talk about his powers, okay? And his powers alone are so bad. But just what he represents, and then like the thing is, in the real life aspect of, people see him as evil, people see him as good. So there's kind of like a propaganda kind of comparison there in terms of who's really trying to write the narrative, which is super relevant in a lot, like the last all time essentially. Whoever has access and power to the media, you can say things like that. So those kind of things were really important, and I think it's just so real. And the other aspect, the last aspect I'll just touch on was from a Sikhi lens. So if you guys don't know what Sikhi is, or Sikh is, like it's the faith that
this is the wrong podcast for you.
Yeah. Yeah, but from a Sikh lens, from like a faith-based lens, when our gurus were people who were proactive and did things whenever there was issues or injustices or oppression. So I really felt that Magneto kind of carried a similar energy and those similar qualities in doing what he did. You can obviously question his methods.
I think he's very relatable, if to us, because of that, and that's one thing I see in him too. Is that
and that's why, like, for me, it's like that's the guy, right?
All right.
Okay, so
Pat, you're up next.
So Pat, since he took your Magneto, what is your?
Well, okay, it's so like, I mean, it's not Donatello, but I'm just holding him up. Yeah, for me, it's very hard to pick one, because when I go into, like, let's just say I'm reading one comic book, I'll go into that and I'll be like, wow, wow, this is fascinating. But if I had to pick one hero, I mean, a lot of people will find it very obvious on me. Malik totally was harping on the wrong hero the whole time in WhatsApp when we were discussing this episode. He definitely is in my top, but I have to go with.
I know who you're gonna pick.
Everybody knows who I'm gonna pick.
But I agree, he is a superhero. Because the other pick you were going to pick was not a superhero.
Not a superhero.
Here's the thing. What defines you to be a superhero, right?
Oh my God. Just tell us what your pick is.
I'm holding him up.
He did.
You just weren't looking.
You're not looking.
Yeah,
my pick is Wolverine of the, arguably of the X-Men. And,
Alberta's very own.
Edmonton's very own. I'll go as far. It's not just Alberta's very own, because if you look at the original Marvel trading cards, the original ones from 1990, it says hometown Edmonton, Alberta on the back of the card. Check it yourself.
I think I have a copy of that in the back of one of my comic books.
Yeah.
Well, he is from Edmonton, and then
you trust got that lumberjack vibe, anyways, too.
He's an Edmontonian. That's why they wanted to make a statue of Wolverine in Edmonton. Anyways, so Wolverine is my pick.
I support it.
For many reasons.
This was
Wolverine,
gonna be my pick.
he was going to be yours?
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, we are all vibing on the same levels today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? It's like you can argue that this superhero is the greatest, but then somebody else brings in like a Magneto, be like, oh, for these reasons, Magneto is
Magneto was out of left field for me. I'm not gonna lie. That was good. I mean, your justification is
is great.
So here's the thing.
That's the thing, right? It's the justification, right? So like, if we let's justify Wolverine.
Well, Wolverine is an antagonistic personality, but he's a superhero. And the reason I like Wolverine, and the reason Wolverine became arguably the top-selling Marvel hero of all time, or one of the top, if not the top, he became the face of Marvel for a while. Spider-Man actually fell behind, but Spider-Man's still the face of Marvel to me.
I would say Wolverine was more the face of X-Men rather than the face of Marvel. When you think of
I'm talking about comics, but anyways,
Yeah.
like, so let's go into the, like, Wolverine is one of those heroes who personally, for reasons I won't fully disclose in the podcast, but my friends and you guys all know, I can relate to Wolverine more than any other superhero out there. Like, just the stuff I've been through in my life and seen and experienced. Wolverine's superpower isn't his claws. Okay, let's get into that. His superpower is the ability to regenerate his cells. He can heal.
The claws were part of his mutant abilities, right?
Not
right?
quite. So
yeah,
Wolverine, listen, hold on. So his power is healing. But yeah, because he's a mutant, he mutated and had claws in him. Now, the reason he was able to use them as a thing is because of his mutant power of healing. Now, to go further, when he was experimented on and he was injected, his skeleton was injected and coated with adamantium, the fictional metal, then his claws got coated. And the only reason he was able to use his claws and stuff was because he would be able to heal his hands where they would come out of. But his initial power as a kid was healing. If you read his comics, then the claws actually grew. He didn't have them as a kid. When he grew up, he started getting these little spikes coming out and then turned into this thing. That's why I don't cite them as an initial superpower. So with Deadpool, who was cloned off of Wolverine, Deadpool has that healing factor as well. Why doesn't he have claws, right? So it's kind of, if you want to look at his initial powers.
Deadpool isn't cloned off of Wolverine. Deadpool is his own person, and then like they experimented
not a clone,
on him too.
But the same they used all of Wolverine's healing power in all those
or something.
Yeah, but that's like a different. Well, in whatever version you're thinking of, sure.
The original X-Force Deadpool.
And I'm gonna bring up a point here with Wolverine. We talked about Captain America. Whereas Captain America in the comic books is very black and white.
Yeah.
Wolverine was also, if you look at some of the stories, Wolverine and Captain America were both part of the World War storyline.
They were.
Yeah, I mean,
they were
this
actually
is
they fought
an
together.
individual that's like over 200 years old or whatever.
Yeah, and Wolverine is a completely different character.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
very.
Right?
Very similar.
That's why I like Wolverine, man. Like, he wasn't the goody-goody. He wasn't a hero initially either. He would kill people, and there was blood and death. And I think, other than Punisher, who was not a failed attempt, but it wasn't a successful attempt in the 80s, late 80s, to bring these darker characters, Wolverine was the first one that was successful that killed.
I mean, he came out as a villain for.
He was a villain
Hulk,
in the Incredible
right?
Hulk, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't a villain. He was Incredible Hulk was out there, and Wolverine was sent as an assassin to kill him. And then he got interfered by Wendigo, which is another character, which is also a mythological creature from the indigenous cultures of North America. So, a lot of things like that. But I mean, ask me questions if you want to know why about Wolverine, but I can ramble. So for the fear of rambling, you can ask me stuff.
Well, what's the major thing why you think you would put him over like a Magneto or a Spider-Man? Then, like, what was his?
He's not more powerful than either one of those guys.
Yeah,
because we're picking a hero, right?
It's his character writing.
So then I guess what qualifies him as a hero to you?
Because his journey, and his struggle and everything he went through, and the supporting characters that affected him in positive and negative ways, including Magneto, including Professor X. But at the end of it, sort of, if you look at his comic book history, he ended up taking over Professor X's role, spoiler alert, and running the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters. He was the headmaster. And he ended up being such a destructive person, like he just hated himself. He didn't have any memories. He didn't remember anything. He was so confused, and a lot of these things, to being the leader of these gifted youngsters, to guiding and teaching these children and sort of mentoring them. Before he became that, he was mentoring some of the X-Men like Jubilee and Kitty Pryde and a lot of others, like, and so the thing with him is he grew. He went from a feral beast, literally, to becoming a civilized human and refining those beast-like abilities, but still then sort of, I guess, pulling back from killing and
I think
growing his morality.
I think it's the greatest example of like personal struggle
and character development.
And character developments. Probably written, I guess, in the Marvel universe, and then that extensive arc is pretty cool.
And I think that's I would say that's what kind of differentiates him from Spider-Man. Whereas we talked about Spider-Man being relatable, his journey was important, all that. Wolverine's overarching story is consistent. So elaborate, so consistent, right? And I think that is a huge piece that.
The cool thing with Wolverine's story is that he didn't have memories, right? The cool thing with that as a writer or as a publisher is that you're able to create stories as you go. Whereas you have with a lot of characters an origin story and that's it, and then you modify it or add to it. Where him, it's like blank slate the whole way through. He didn't remember this.
It's so well done throughout the whole time as well. Like it's like a consistent flow, right? And like there's like the way they paced it too, and in telling things, it's so good.
And he starts off like a lone wolf, right? And
I guess that's something that we don't see a lot. Like we talked about it at the start of the show, is like there's so much difference between universes, different authors, different writers. But if we look at the storyline of Wolverine, that has been consistent of his struggle and his journey.
Yeah. Like if you talk about like neat. When we're talking about storytelling, like he changes from like a here to a completely other place, right? Like whereas like if we look back at Magneto, for example, he's pretty coasting in terms of like character qualities and like morals and ethics, right? But like Wolverine went from like one aspect of like he didn't really give a shit about certain things or different people, but for then as like but the one reference, like he's grooming the next generation of mutants or whatever, right? Trying to grow the community for the best. So
and he had this like really sad, heartbreaking tragedy surrounding him the whole time. Even his like funny little love story / crush story while he's on the X-Men, it's funny in some senses, but it's like
this guy's routinely he's routinely the beaten dog, right?
He's the beaten dog, and that's a great phrase for him. And like literally that's probably the perfect phrase for him.
Sabretooth calls him runt his whole
exactly. But the thing is, there's nothing more loyal than a dog, right? Allegedly. So that's another reason that's a great metaphor. Like he's so loyal to those. And his love story side of it, which is like all tragedy, they all end in tragedy. So he like self-isolates himself. He doesn't want to be around anybody because anybody he becomes close to ends up dying. It's such a cool, like, you just feel for the guy. And he's hairy, I'm hairy. Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah, it works.
Right? Works.
So Simran, your pick was Wolverine. Do you have a backup or?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I do.
You can't come without a backup.
You guys, okay, so you guys kind of piled on this character a little bit earlier.
I feel like we're hitting the nail on it. Like everybody's presenting a pretty solid.
I mean, maybe, it's sad that we don't have more DC characters in here, but I'm gonna continue the trend. for a number of reasons, which I'll explain. And so my character, my superhero is Captain America.
Oh, solid.
Okay,
I,
so
He was one of my
I would
three.
agree. That was one of my favorites, and I think
yeah,
the reason I didn't pick him is because I was saying Spider-Man's so relatable, but at the
Yeah.
same time, Captain America has those pieces in his story too.
well, I recognize in a few instances. Firstly, that this is like all guys, and we all picked male characters, and I think
good to point out.
Jean Grey,
and
is something
Dark
and she's
Phoenix?
holy. If we're talking pure
Jean-
superpowers like awesomeness, like
But even
Phoenix.
then-
I mean,
Are you kidding
literally,
me?
Jean Grey is the ultimate cheat code.
Yeah.
and
So-
one
Or
of the
Phoenix,
like
Yeah.
female X-Men. Like I think Jean Grey is a huge thing. We could talk about her in a bit, but
Huge. But like, you look at, like, or even Storm. Like, I think all the X-Men have especially the female X-Men have like
Wonder Woman.
crazy,
they were all
crazy cool
cool.
powers. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're all wicked. But the guy for me,
Rogue.
that, like, sets me off. Yeah, Rogue. Wow. Talk about really complex characters for X-Men. Like, just really multi-layered. Like, they have their darkness, they have their problems, they all come together. It's like this real band of misfits. Anyway, so Captain America, here's a guy who grew up, like a poor
Don.
kid in Brooklyn.
the runt of the litter.
Runt of the litter, smallest dude in the neighborhood,
Is there
always
a
got
theme
the
here?
crap kicked out of him.
Yeah.
Wasn't like a wisecracking kid, but just a good kid. Couldn't even, fight the Nazis at that time.
Are you talking about Moloch? Oh wait, never mind. Sorry.
Which was a huge deal, like, back then. I mean, like, people were shamed
Yeah.
for not being able to go overseas to enlist.
Yeah, they were.
In the war. It was crazy. And then you see how this character was used somewhat as propaganda during that time, for the larger, like, American struggle. You talk about how and it's even documented in the character's own backstory, so you don't know where, like, reality and fiction sort of, like, overlap. There's a sort of blurred line in there where it's like very, very interesting social commentary in the character's history. And then but I look at the character himself. So he's literally superhuman. Like, he took super soldier serum, but it never made him more than what a peak
He didn't change who he
human
was on the inside.
could be. Yeah, and what it was supposed to do is make you more of who you were. So you saw what it did to Red Skull. That their version of the super soldier serum turned this person into a crazy person. And you saw, future iterations of individuals who took the serum and what it did to them, and why Dr. Erskine was so reticent to give it to just anybody.
Yeah.
He gave it to Steve Rogers because he saw the heart in this individual, and that, I think, was his real, like, superpower all along. And then you see him become this physical specimen, but also this symbol for, like, hope and goodness, and then at the same time be this amazing leader and, like, ridiculous military tactician. And then, like, in Secret Wars, which is like a crazy story. It was one of my favorite Marvel
too.
stories. You see him, like, roundly admired by all these other superheroes. The greatest of great of Earth's superheroes just look to him. Yeah. And see him and think, yeah, this is the guy. This is the guy we're going to
He's our
follow.
boss. He's
the guy, yeah. And he
think
wasn't
when-
the strongest one. He wasn't the strongest one. He wasn't the smartest one. He was the guy because he was the guy. And I think the reason why was because at any and every turn, when there was an opportunity to do the right thing that would lead to pain and suffering, he was, or the wrong move where he could have just let something slide, he was unflinching and uncompromising in that.
Yeah.
And it was,
I think when we think of like traditional superhero, I think Captain
Yeah.
America is the gold standard.
yeah,
The black and white good guy always has a good moral compass.
yeah.
He's
And
strong. And
the
I
de-
think that's a great pick. Captain America is a
yeah.
great pick.
So like for me, and here's why it's very important with how his powers line up to who the person he is. Even with his super soldier serum, he's not, throwing cars at people. He's not fighting aliens one-on-one. He has a shield. The symbolic gesture of who he is he's a protector. And he works in the defense of the good and the just. And then
Yeah.
so it's like very idealistic as far as like, the messaging and stuff like that. And I think that maybe that's a little bit antiquated. But at the same time, I look at the character and I compare him to something like Superman, who has his own struggles as an alien trying to fit in, doing all this stuff. And there's all these nuances in that character. But what separates me is that that's also like that prototypical golden boy,
Yeah, that was
farm kid out of
DC
All American boy. Yeah, that's Superman.
all
and
American.
Steve
Yeah,
Rogers,
yeah. And what the difference between those two characters for me is that Superman's powers are a cheat code.
He's not a human.
He's not a human. He embodies the greatest things of like the greatest attributes of humankind, even though he's not human. So there's really, really cool things going on with that. And then they've added to this character, but largely this is an individual that literally his powers are a cheat code. Whereas I look at Steve Rogers, Captain America, this is an individual who, even though he's like the peak of human physical condition, like physical and mental like condition, he's still not remotely close to his superhero counterparts.
Yeah, like he has like his
Whereas,
strength and like stamina, those things. He's
Yeah,
strong,
and
obviously, but he's not
despite
shooting
all
laser
that,
beams out of his eyes and stuff. Yeah.
exactly. He doesn't have like ice breath, and he can't, like turn back time by like
That's not
Yeah,
true.
flying
He used
around
to
a
throw.
planet
He
the
used
other
to
way.
throw Bucky, another human.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
he was
strength.
strong. That's strength. It's not like you can't do that. It would hurt, but it's not like you can't do that.
It's a good old yeet.
It's not like The Rock couldn't freaking throw me across my backyard. Do you know what I mean? But
Shout out The Rock.
yeah. So despite those physical limitations, even though he was a super soldier, he still made those choices. And
have you ever read
and
Captain
those
America
choices
comics?
They're wild. But like
They're
my
insane,
point
yeah.
is like what encapsulated it for me was Civil War, where he made a decision to be like, no, this is wrong,
And, he
and
paid the
walked
price.
away, and it started a war, and it got him killed.
Let's not spoil it, but it cost him a
Anyway,
lot.
yeah, it cost him a lot, and not just him; it cost everyone around him a lot. And at that instant where he realized what it was costing, he chose to
Pay
stop.
that price. Yeah.
He chose to, and that restraint was equally admirable to me. So this character, his arc, his struggles, very, very nuanced, very interesting. He's a man lost in time.
Yeah.
He's a man apart, lost in time. And then his ideals are from a different time, and then the struggles he's faced and the way in which he's faced them, and with what was given to him, and he's basically like the entire universe's like moral compass. Yeah, at that point where his direction changed Shield around, like from what it could have been, which was like a very, very dangerous thing, into what it was under his directive. And then, like the world was righted because of him.
Yeah, like
multiple
for
Great
like
situations.
picks.
I liked even like with your comparison to like Superman, because
Yeah.
I personally I don't know much about Captain America outside of what I got from the recent Marvel
Mm.
series. I never read Captain America.
Amazing series.
I didn't
You gotta
really.
read it.
He just never piqued my interest because I'll be honest. When you're growing up, like that American tag is thrown into it, and
Yeah, you
as a
kind of want to.
Canadian,
If
you're
he
just
was
like
Captain
Then you
Canada,
need to
I would
read
be
Alpha
even-
Flight.
yeah,
Yeah, even for what that mess what the American flag in America, I think it doesn't stand for the kind of freedom of liberty that some Americans wanted to stand for.
yeah,
And
100%.
you take that context outside of America, it's even less so.
Yeah,
And so under that context, the character does have problems, and it's important to address that.
yeah,
But I'm looking at the individual character themselves as if they
As
were
a
like,
hero.
yeah, and that's
yeah,
fine. And I
that
wasn't
guy
even,
you're looking on the
behaves like a
inside.
hero. Yeah.
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah,
not even what I
think
was like trying to reference, right? Like it's more so like when you talk about Superman, because they're both like in that sense golden boys, right?
Yeah.
In terms of morals and ethics, right? But like you kind of
You want to talk
did
about face? That's a face.
yeah, and you did a separation in terms of powers, which is like which is accurate for sure. To me, yeah, like Superman, he's up there for me because he is so human in his mindset, thinking, and morals, and ethics and everything. But with Captain America, like when you said he's just like, the thing that stands out with him is his conviction to justice, right?
Yeah.
It's just absolutely unwavering conviction, which is like, which you don't, people will break, right? Just because, like, just something's, the weight of the world is on your shoulders.
You
Like,
lose.
right. And then you see this guy just not willing to budge,
So
which
can
is
I-
like a human quality that's like one of the most rarest qualities of like you can ever
So
find, right?
in the late 90s, around 1997 roughly, give or take, Marvel and DC did this thing which they did actually a while earlier as well, in the 60s. They threw their two universes together to create something called Amalgam Comics, which was an amalgamation of two characters. First they had a Marvel versus DC series, and then what happened is the universes exploded and merged, and Superman and Captain America were one of the characters that they merged, and the name was Super Soldier to that new character. So I mean, whenever I think Captain America, it always reminds me of Superman as well, and vice versa, because yeah, I guess golden boy is the right terminology. Sorry guys, just fixing my light here. But at the same time, there's many other superheroes that they've thrown together which kind of relate. But the cool thing with Captain America was, for a little while, to catch the youth, he would teach his little sidekick, Bucky, who grows to become the Winter Soldier, FYI. He teaches him, and he grows to become something even bigger than that, aka your Civil War reference. But he teaches him a lot of lessons that I guess children, as readers of Captain America comics earlier, were able to gain lessons from. So it was definitely cool. It was like having an older brother teach you lessons while reading Captain. Like if you read those comics, they're pretty.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're pretty
you
great.
got to read them.
I
Even
look
his
at
newer
that,
series, they're good.
and yeah,
I'll just
okay,
have
so
to get,
yeah,
I'll
I
have
was
to
just
get
gonna
him from
say
you after.
the newer series are really, really good because the guys writing about it are like, I think he literally put like a Jordan Peterson quote in for like the Red Skull.
Yeah.
It was amazing political commentary in an like I said, in an art form that's like very, very, like, it's always been very politically conscious, especially when it comes to Marvel stuff. So I saw that, and it had been going around Twitter a bit too, and I just had to mention that because it was very, very
The beauty that I'm kind of seeing from our conversation today is there's no really one greatest superhero.
No.
An argument can be made, and we kind of did just with four, and there's a whole host of others that we can even talk about or even just briefly mention. But a
Yeah.
superhero is somebody that you relate with your life experience, or there's certain parts of their story that tie in with you, and I think that's the beauty of these fictional characters. I
Yeah.
mean, there's characters that we didn't even talk about. Like if you think of superheroes,
Oh
we
my
think of
gosh, yes.
Thor, right? Thor is a god. Like he's such a powerful being. Like he would be a pretty cool honorable mention.
I love that. I like like, and we have a bunch of like non-powered but like very very smart or very gifted individuals. Like, okay, you talk about Iron Man, who's like has like one of the most ridiculous intellects like in that universe.
But we all agree that Batman is not a superhero, right?
Yeah, Batman's not a superhero. He's a mentally deranged rich person. It's like if Elon Musk like had like childhood crises
Trauma.
and
but that's
basically never
like,
got to cope with them.
But that's like, and that's why
hyped character.
I compare the story of Batman to Spider-Man. Like the death of his parents is essential to
it's
Batman,
motivating.
and it's motivating. Without that, it's so romanticized. Like the death of his parents is so romanticized. And
But
this
like,
is why he's got lots of money. This is why he didn't have to go to like. All of that, all of his story is contingent
it's
on
such
his parents
such an
dying.
outlandish
It's such
an outlandish character.
Didn't grow up a billionaire.
It's such an outlandish character that in today's context, the kind of wealth someone like would have to maintain in order to do that, this person would be.
This is
roundly.
That's definitely more in the realms of fantasy than it is in terms of relatability.
Let me throw a curveball at you guys. Just a curveball because Malik wants it.
He's just a dude with a tool belt.
The whole point of Batman
carpenters
is
have
that
tool
like
belts.
it's like an everyman. It's like this character
We're all Batman.
does not have superpowers, and yet
he just.
So you can't have it both ways. You can't.
Let me
have
throw a
the Christopher
curveball at you
Nolan
guys to make you
Batman
wonder
and
about
have the
something. Okay, think about this. I like Batman. I'm not gonna sit there and do what Malik wants is to make me mad. It's not gonna happen. But the thing is. I know he's doing this on purpose. I don't really care.
Trash.
Man. I picked mine.
Batman's trash.
Batman. Here's the thing with Batman. Not a lot of people can think about this.
I own the most Batman comics out of all my comics. So
I love Batman.
Yeah.
So what Marvel did with
that's because Pat was forcing it down your throat. That's fine.
No. So what Marvel did with Wolverine, right, in the 80s. 70s arguably is what DC actually was trying to do with Batman, but in the 30s. Okay, so Batman is that dark character who'd beat the crap out of his opponents. He would have that morality not to kill them. And then the best moments I think in the Batman timeline is when he encounters Superman and they have their agree to disagree discussions, but their goal is ultimately the same. And it's one of my favorite series to read, Batman versus Superman or Batman Superman collectively in the DC comics, especially lately. Those are my favorite series to read because they have their own methods. Batman's very dark and Superman's very golden light, golden boy. But the thing is, like, Batman won't kill somebody, but Batman will beat the crap out of somebody so bad that they're deranged, unable to move, paralyzed in Arkham. And so much to the point where, you might as well have killed them, right? So that's the difference between the two. And that's where Batman is kind of cool in the sense that what Marvel did with Wolverine, DC actually attempted with Batman, but
Wolverine had superpowers. Wolverine had superpowers that were supernatural. So but here's one more point. One more point for Batman. So if we talk about superheroes and their villains, a lot of these superheroes they fight these villains, but I think with Batman, he has a very strong repertoire of villains that he faced. But without Joker, what is Batman? Without the Riddler, what is Batman? Yeah. Right? Like he is so dependent on these villains.
Yeah. Any of these characters could be.
Yeah. But isn't that any character?
Yeah, it's any character.
No.
Just any character.
You could any of these characters could be like the ones that we've picked could be themselves. Could be, and it wouldn't matter about the villain.
Yeah, Batman.
But you can't say the same about Batman.
Like I feel like Joker is more popular than Batman.
So, but like, and even in their own struggles, like Batman, this is what really disgusts me about the.
Not going to make me mad, Malik.
There's the character of Batman. Firstly, is so willfully selfish in his motivations, that he wouldn't kill, that he wouldn't do all of these things that needed to be done if you were a human being, an unpowered human being, and you're supposedly to be dark, that you have this line all of a sudden, and really
That line didn't come till you met Superman, though. If you really want to go into the universe,
it presents a flaw in the rationality of the character. And for me, it's just like they made a character designed around like 1930s, like hard-boiled, like noir detectives, but they made it for kids. And then this character evolved into this exploration of weird, toxic psychological disorders. And then from there, it's like, okay, what do we actually, how does this character actually function? And it's just like the
consistency.
over and over again, the behaviors of this character are like the most vile things that an average person would do to someone else. And you realize that this guy is sick. He's messed in his head, and the whole concept is wrong. Outside
there's
of
this theory that
situation,
Joker, like,
yeah,
there's this theory that like the whole universe is actually shown based on, like, it's between Batman and Joker, right? Because arguably, you guys gotta say, give them this, that they're the most iconic hero and villain.
I was gonna say, like,
I mean,
like the pop culture
duos,
impact of Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. I think all three are kind of at that same level.
Sure.
Batman is huge.
No,
huge
I'm saying
culture.
Batman, Joker. Like, it's the most
Yeah.
typical
so
one-on-one.
so you're saying Batman is nothing without Joker? I agree.
No, I will say to you this, that
He has so many other
there's
better
this-
villain stories too.
Yeah.
No, there are. Don't get
Batman?
me wrong.
Yeah,
But Joker is, there's this whole
Not better,
there's
but
this whole
good.
theory that the whole Batman universe is based out of Joker's perspective of, and his schizophrenic, and he sees Batman, but it's not really Batman. What he's seeing is it's a reflection of himself.
It's an apparition,
or is it his brother?
Whatever, right? So
yeah, there's
the
so many
point-
there's so many instances of that.
Kashwantan Patwan.
Look,
Yeah.
the whole thing, my whole point is Batman by himself as just a superhero character, the course of his life and all that stuff.
I feel like the
It's
four that we
not-
presented today.
Yeah,
are
it's
better
not-
than
yeah.
Batman.
Batman
Yeah,
is actually a detective. If you go back to the origins, he came
Look,
from
stop
Detective
defending
Comics.
this terrible character.
I didn't defend him. You
I
guys tried to make me
I
defend
like him. I don't know. You guys are just absolutely crapping
He's
on
a
him, but he's
no.
pretty
Okay,
cool.
look,
He's not a,
like
but that's why
the tragedy of his family drives him to become this crazy night villain that goes around beating up burglars and stuff.
You guys
you
just,
look
just
at-
you guys just think his character's too flawed, right? It's not necessarily the depiction of like what.
I don't think it's not too flawed. I look at the Killing Joke,
Yeah,
and I look at the kind of damage a person like Joker would do to someone that, like, people that you love and things like that. Or I look at Red Hood and things like that. I look at the concept of taking on and maintaining multiple multiple versions of a sidekick, and then having sex with one of your sidekicks, and then like just the layers of like flawed charactership of all of those situations, but still being this holier than thou, I'm not going to kill person, is totally messed up.
yeah.
And-
Because
and
Wolverine. So you're just saying there's no
Wolverine-
consistency in like
But
his
here's the
morals
thing.
and ethics are.
Yeah. That's what I'm
we talked
saying.
about
And
it at
as,
the start of
as a
the
superhero,
episode.
that's beyond
What is a
his
superhero?
lack of powers and his
lack of
ridiculous
for me, the
amalgamation
conversation
of
ends
wealth.
there. Lack of power.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any.
Yeah, okay. But that's
Superpowers.
more like, for me, it's the moral, like the moral ambiguity of this character. Because Wolverine was flawed. Yeah, he murdered people. Yeah, he did terrible things. But you know what? He never trotted around with this whole like, oh, I'm this and this, and I did this because my parents died, this and that. He didn't remember who he was. He's just a guy, and most of the time he's just like had these powers. People messed with him, and he fought back, and most of the time he killed people, or like, you know what I mean? He's this constantly kicked down guy. But Batman, no. In 1 second, he's the greatest detective, this amazing superhero, he's this amazing crime fighter, this and that, and at the same time he shows such moral conviction that he will not kill his worst enemy even after he's raped and paralyzed this woman who's his lover / sidekick / whatever. You know what I mean? And done
So-
this to one of his
Yeah.
friends and all this and that, and like killed one of his sidekicks. And it's just like,
I'm getting the vibes from Cinnamon for sure.
I'm not,
I
like,
wanted. I
it's-
wanted to trigger. I wanted to trigger Patwan.
like, what are
but I
you?
clearly, as every episode of Pardesi Beats Unplugged,
God damn
it
it.
ends with
It
Simran
goes
being
with
triggered.
Simran.
So
Yeah.
with that, feel free to follow us on our social media, Pradesi_Beats on Instagram and Twitter. Let us know who you think the greatest superhero is, or who your favorite superhero is.
If you guys really want to have fun with it, just
we didn't
comment
really.
Batman.
I'm feeling like a lot of people are gonna say Batman or like Superman's pretty a common.
I mean, that's-
Yeah,
I thought
sure.
we
I
would
mean,
have
like,
even
hey,
went in that direction, but we
every-
didn't.
Everybody's allowed to have theirs, but Batman's
but
trash, and you all know it. Yeah.
But all right, so follow us on social media, Instagram and Twitter at Pardesi_Beats. As well, we are now on all major podcast platforms, so feel free to not only watch us on YouTube, but you can listen to us as well. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We are on Audible as well. So Pardesi Beats Unplugged. That is the episode. Before we go, we want to give a shout out to somebody very important who recently passed away in the Edmonton radio community. I'll throw this over to Pat because he had a really strong relationship with this, but this individual was instrumental in getting both of us involved in the radio world.
Yeah, man. Okay, so very, very sad news. Last week, I mean, it's the week of May. It's May 5th today that we're recording this, right? Last week, our beloved friend Antonio Sorgiovanni passed away, also known as Tony. And Tony is the reason that Pardesi Beats exists today. I'll tell you that much. So you listeners are fans of our show. Any of you would not have any of this if Tony didn't do what he did when originally I started out at World FM. Okay. And based off of that, then Malik and just everybody. But long story short, we're all here because of Tony. And Tony's guidance, Tony's teachings, Tony's
Openness and creativity.
just his knowledge. He was a very influential person in the workplace that we both worked at. Now, it's ironic and it was so sad during this whole podcast because so many of these conversations I was having with you three, with the four of us, and then our audience is engaging in a similar way that me and Tony used to just, for lack of better terms, shoot the at the radio station, off, out of hours of our actual being on air type of thing. And, me and Tony would talk pop culture all the time. That was one of his favorite things. He would go to all the Comic Cons with Frank, and, he would always tell me about it, and as well as sports and everything that we do on Pardesi Beats. He was one of the initial guys. Wrestling was huge. Tony loved it. And so, I mean, I can't say enough words to give justice to this guy. Tony was a legend in the Edmonton radio community. He was known worldwide for radio and just his amazing personality. And, our condolences from the whole Pardesi Beats team to the Sorgiovanni family. Tony's brother is still with World FM, who we are no longer with as Pardesi Beats, but we started off with. Tony's dad, Leo, was a very, very prominent World FM radio host as well. And Tony followed in his footsteps with Frank, and they both sort of handled it. So yeah, Tony left us last week, and very sad situation. Like, I'm at a loss of words, but yeah, man, shout out to Tony.
Yeah. Well, we are wishing the best to his family, that hopefully they can deal with this as best as possible. It's obviously a tough time. And obviously the impact he had on you guys, the show, and like how we are able to, be able to do this, obviously meant a lot. So respect to that. And yeah.
All right. And with that, we will wrap up the show. We'll meet you guys next week. You know where to find us. Make sure you follow us on all social medias at Pardesi_Beats. Take care.